Anti-Korean sentiment. Anti-Korean sentiment involves hatred or dislike that is directed towards Korean people, culture or either of the two states on the Korean Peninsula. Anti-Korean sentiment is present in China, Taiwan, and Japan, and stems from such issues as nationalism, politics, economic competition, cultural influences, and historical disputes. Anti-North Korean sentiment may be the strongest in Japan, South Korea, and the United States. In China, it has only come to prominence recently, due to issues such as the 2008 Olympic torch relay, which have accumulated over other issues over the years. In Japan, modern dislike for South Korea can be seen as a form of national rivalry. More recently, this rivalry was heightened by events such as the 2002 FIFA World Cup, co-hosted by both nations. Korea and China have historically maintained strong ties. As Korea was annexed by Imperial Japan in 1910, Korea became under Japanese influence. Chinese believe that some ethnic Koreans were in the Imperial Japanese Army which invaded China during the Second Sino-Japanese War. Additionally, adding to this sentiment is that some Koreans were reported to be involved into the operation of the Burma-Siam Death Railway. The Chinese referred to Koreans as Irrational. From a psychological perspective, Chinese are seen as assuming Koreans to be part of a Sinocentric East Asian regional order. As a part of this group, Koreans are assumed to be inherently friendly to China. Chinese also emphasize hierarchy within this Sinocentric order, where China is at the top of the hierarchy. In contrast, Koreans reject the Sinocentric East Asian regional order and emphasize equality in diplomatic relations in East Asia. This rejection leads to conflict of existential identities, threatening the very meaning of being Korean and Chinese. At the end of World War II, North Korea, aligned with the Soviet bloc, became friendly with the People's Republic of China, while the PRC and the Republic of Korea did not recognize each other. During the Korean War, when China was engaged in war with South Korea and its United Nations allies, efforts through propaganda were placed to intimidate hatred against South Korea, named a puppet state of the United States at the time by the PRC government. From 1992 on, after South Korea's normalization of relations with China, relations with the People's Republic of China gradually improved. Within the Chinese population, Korean art and culture became popular from 2000 onwards. Amid improvements in relations, however, there were also looming anti-South Korean sentiments involved in various disputes between the two countries. Within Taiwan, some existing animosity towards Koreans amongst Taiwanese may be present as a result of the rivalry between the two states in relation to baseball. Disputes between Taiwan and Korea in the international sport competition arose numerous times. In November 2010, Taiwanese citizens protested against the disqualification of a taekwondo athlete at the 2010 Asian Games after a Filipino referee disqualified a Taiwanese fighter, calling for a boycott on South Korean goods. On the 23rd of August 1992, South Korea's Nordpolitik made it to establish a diplomatic ties with the People's Republic of China after Soviet Union. This resulted in the change in the diplomatic relationship of South Korea with the Republic of China, since it replaced anti-communist foreign policy with an effort to improve relations with other surrounding countries in the sense of geopolitics, including the People's Republic of China, in order to pressure and appease North Korea that eases the political anxiety and softens military tension in the Korean Peninsula and enables the possibility of a peaceful reunification of Korea. As normalization begun, Roh transferred diplomatic recognition from the ROC and PRC, and confiscated the property of the ROC embassy, transferring it to the PRC. According to an official from the Korean Trade Office in Taipei, sales of Korean products are not very successful in Taiwan because the Taiwanese felt very betrayed after Korea severed diplomatic ties with Taiwan and re-established ties with China in 1992, because the people of Taiwan had seen Korea as an ally in the fight against communism. Now, because the two countries have similar export-oriented economies and focus on the same business sectors, the Taiwanese see Korea as a great rival, and think that losing to Korea would be the end of Taiwan. In June 2012, CEO of Foxconn Terry Gou stated that he had great esteem for Japanese, especially those who are able to disagree with you in person and not stab you in the back, unlike the Gao Li Bongzhe, sparking controversy. Historically, relations between Japan and Korea have been poor. During the Joseon dynasty, Waku pirate raids on Korean soil were frequent, which would eventually form the basis of hatred between the two sides. Such tensions built up further after the Japanese annexation of Korea in 1910. During the 1923 Great Kanto earthquake, widespread damage occurred in a region with a significant Korean population, and much of the local Japanese overreacted to rumors which spread after the earthquake. Within the aftermath of the event, there was a common perception amongst groups of far-right Japanese that ethnic Koreans were poisoning wells, eventually setting off a killing rampage against Koreans, where Japanese would use the shibboleth of Babai-Bubibo to distinguish ethnic Koreans from Japanese, as it was assumed that Koreans would be unable to pronounce the line correctly, instead as all people who failed the test were killed, which caused many ethnic Chinese, also unable to correctly pronounce the shibboleth, to be indiscriminately killed in large numbers. Other shibboleths used were Ju-Goen, Go-Jisen and Gagigu-Jigo, where Japanese people pronounce initial G as and medial G as, whereas Koreans pronounce the two sounds as and respectively. Much of the anti-Korean sentiment present today, however, deal with contemporary attitudes. During the 2002 FIFA World Cup, Japanese and Korean supporters clashed with one another, while Japanese media reported the conduct of Korean spectators in a negative fashion. Both sides were also known to post racist messages against each other on online bulletins. There were also disputes regarding how the event was to be hosted, as a result of the rivalry between the two nations. The territorial dispute over Liancourt rocks also fuels outrage within far-right groups. Manga Kenkunri Ubaishiri Yamano discusses these issues while making many other arguments and claims against Korea. Znichi Koreans in Japan are also publicly perceived to be a nuisance and are seen as likely to cause trouble and start riots, a view shared by former Tokyo Governor Shintaro Ishihara. The Znichi organization, Jongryon, is commonly accused of providing funding and material to North Korea and indoctrinating the Znichi Korean population to actively hate Japan. Right-wing groups in Japan today still commonly target ethnic Koreans living within Japan. One such group, known as Zaitokukai, is organized by members on the internet, and is known to be responsible for leading street demonstrations against Korean schools. There is also much concern in Japan regarding North Korea and its nuclear and long-range missile capabilities, as a result of missile tests in 1993, 1998 and 2006 and an underground nuclear test in 2006. There are also controversies regarding North Korean abductions of Japanese, where Japanese citizens were abducted by North Korean agents between 1977 and 1983. The Korean wave, or the exportation of South Korean pop culture, has created some resentment among pockets of Japanese society. Many Japanese citizens with conservative views and some right-wing nationalist groups have organized anti-Korean wave demonstrations via 2-channel. On the 9th of August 2011, more than 2,000 protesters demonstrated in front of Fuji TV's headquarters in Odaiba, Tokyo against the broadcasting of Korean dramas. Earlier, in July 2011, well-known actor Sosuke Takoka was fired from his agency, Stardust Promotion, for tweeting against the influx of Korean soaps. The general perception of Koreans on 2-channel is negative, and board members often reference stereotypes of Koreans, such as the use of dogs in Korean cuisine. According to a 2014 BBC World Service poll, Japanese people alike hold the largest anti-North Korean sentiment in the world, with 91% negative views of North Korea's influence, and with only 1% positive view, making Japan the third country with the most negative feelings of North Korea in the world, after South Korea and the United States. There are some efforts to create mutual understanding and friendship between people in two countries from dialogue, cultural exchange, and the education. Some South Korean men take sex tourism trips to Mongolia, often as clients of South Korean-run businesses in Mongolia, has also sparked anti-Korean sentiment among Mongolians, and is said to be responsible for the increasing number of assaults on South Korean nationals in the country. The participation of conscripted Korean soldiers serving under the Japanese Empire's flag in the Japanese occupation of the Philippines in the World War II has caused some Filipinos, especially those from the older generations, to associate the Koreans with atrocities committed during the war. In the recent years, there has been an increasing number of Koreans migrating to the Philippines. Although Koreans are generally welcome to the country, there has been some concerns. One concern is that many Korean migrants refuse to fully assimilate. Koreans continue to prefer to consume Korean products even if a local counterpart is available. It was reported that tour operators in Cebu do not benefit from Korean tourists because they are barred by Korean companies. Thus, only Korean travel agencies solely benefit from the tourist market. There have been complaints of rowdy behavior by Koreans in the country, and Koreans are the #1 violator of immigration laws according to the Philippine Bureau of Immigration. During the era of the Soviet Union, ethnic Koreans in the Russian Far East were subject to deportations under the national delimitation policy, with the majority of Koreans relocating to Soviet republics in Central Asia. The deportation was preceded by a typical Soviet scenario of political repression, falsified trials of local party leaders accused of insurrection, accusations of plans of the secession of the Far Eastern Krai, local party purges, and articles in Pravda about the Japanese espionage in the Far East. The resettlement plans were revived with new vigor in August 1937, ostensibly with the purpose of suppressing the penetration of the Japanese espionage into the Far Eastern Krai. This time, however, the direction of resettlement was westward, to Soviet Central Asia. From September to October 1937, more than 172,000 Soviet Koreans were deported from the border regions of the Russian Far East to Kazakh SSR and Uzbek SSR. During the Korean War, the United States fought in alliance with South Korea against North Korea. Since the war, the common knowledge of North Korea is that it is an oppressive state. Following heavy remilitarization and a series of missile tests, Americans were made to fear a possible attack by a rogue state such as North Korea. In United States President George W. Bush's State of the Union address on January 29, 2002, he described North Korea as a part of the axis of evil. Following the nuclear program of North Korea and subsequent 2006 North Korean nuclear test, the United States imposed UN sanctions on North Korea. These economic sanctions are very unlikely to be lifted by the United States due to North Korea's non-compliance to the six-party talk agreements. Since 1988 until 2008, and again from November 2017, North Korea has been designated as a state sponsor of terrorism for supporting Hamas and Hezbollah against Israel, their role in the murder of Kim Jong-nam, supporting Bashar al-Assad in the Syrian civil war, close relationships with Iran, and the suspicious death of Otto Warmbier. The Los Angeles riots of 1992 were partially based on anti-Korean sentiment among African Americans. Ice Cube's song Black Korea, which would later be accused of inciting racism, was written in response to the death of 15-year-old African-American Latasha Harlins, who was shot and killed by Korean-American store owner Soon Ja-doo on March 16, 1991, as well as the preponderance of Korean grocery stores in primarily black neighborhoods. The event resulted in mass ransacking and destruction of Korean-American-owned stores in Los Angeles by groups of young African Americans. There are a variety of derogatory terms referring to Korea. Many of these terms are viewed as racist. However, these terms do not necessarily refer to the Korean people as a whole. They can also refer to specific policies, or specific time periods in history, or specific time periods in history, or specific